want a complete and accurate N400. That's the critical issue here as people do this. A person's going to file this with 2 passport-style photos, and we're going to tell them where the local passport photo locations are so they can get some passport photos done right away. A check with money order. The check, it's $680 to file for this, and that includes the $85 biometrics, facial, fingerprint fee, things like that, or a fee waiver. There's an exemptions to this for people over 75 and certain people in the military, so there might be people who get exempted from certain parts of the fees. We'll need to have copies of both sides of their green cards. Our plan is that everybody who's there is going to have their green card with them. We're going to have that photocopy made. And we make sure they send this by certified mail, by courier service, by something, because you won't believe how many people simply send it off and don't have any verification that it ever got delivered. They just regular mail, and then they never hear anything, and there's this money gone, and it was, it's all sorts of stuff. So we really want them to use some sort of service where there's proof that it got delivered and some sort of registration there.
Oh, sorry. This as you were talking.
There we go. I was on slide 17, but Emily's moving to slide 18.
Actually, I'm not sure if I've read 18.
Okay, I'll do it. This is
the
checklist. I'm a big person into checklists, and especially because we're dealing with people who we won't be dealing with again. So I really just like to, look at that checklist for wherever you are, and make sure that when you move it on to the next group through the forms manager, that you've done your checklist. For paralegals, there's initialing. We want to be able to track down who's doing it, not because we want to come get you for anything, but we want to be able to be sure we know who's doing what. Reviewed the green card, reviewed the page A, made sure it's ready to see the lawyer. Red flag issues are issues that, like, oh, there's a criminal issue here, or gee, I added this up and I'm not sure if they've been here enough. There are things that we want to check. At the copy center, we do the same thing. My assistant, the woman who was just in here for a few moments, she's going to be, I believe, at my location. She's going to be doing the copy center, and she is diligent, making sure everything's there. So she's going to, both sides, copy the form, everything else. So there's all these checklists we want to make sure people have. So when you leave, you can look at it and say, it's been done, as opposed to, oh, I don't know if it's been done, I have to go check. Because that takes longer. That's a big problem for us. Slide number 19.
All right. So if you have your copy of the N400, it's useful to just refer to it as we're going over some high points that we want to point out about completing the form. Let's just look under Part 1. There's a lot of questions about a person's name. Point C under there talks about if you've ever used other names, and that includes maiden names, or if you had legally changed your name, prior names. So be sure to ask people about those. Point D talks about a name change. This isn't really applicable because people don't naturalize before a judge in this area, so point D really isn't an option. You're not able to change your name through the naturalization process. Part 2, which is the first part of the slide we're looking at, slide number 19, basis for eligibility. This is where the person's going to mark if they're applying based on 5 years as a lawful permanent resident, or if they're applying based on 3 years because they're married to a U.S. citizen. So if they are applying under 5 years, that's point A, and then B is if they're married to a U.S. citizen, they only need to be a resident for 3 years. And just to note, or just to remind you that they still have to have a valid marriage with that person, and they need to be living with that person at the time that they submit the application. Another thing to point out, D refers to people who are applying under different parts of the law. You might run into someone from American Samoa who's a U.S. national, or who got benefits under the Violence Against Women Act. That would be a place to write that in if they have some other basis for being eligible.
Okay, the next slide.
Actually, did I skip something?
No.
Didn't up here.
Address history, number 20. Just really important. The government needs to know this address information. So we're encouraging people as they get ready to do this to go out and try to get that figured out before they come to talk to us, because that's going to be real helpful. I don't know about you, but I sure moved around a lot, and I could never remember over the years where I had lived. And they need to have that information down for at least that 5-year period of time. And we also understand that people don't remember everything, and so we're going to ask them to enter as much as possible. It says here unknown Seattle, Washington. Well, if you're in like Yakima, we don't want you to write unknown Seattle, Washington, but where did someone live? And you put the kind of basic city element and just make sure that they're going to be going from there. Employment history, same thing. The government says, tell us where you worked for the last, it's 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or 3 years, depending on the issue. And there's a caution here because I've actually had clients who have had jobs that have been outside the United States for certain periods of time, and the government's going to kind of look at that and say, you were working outside the United States, where did you live? Is that permanent? So it's something to be thinking about as you're doing it. This is kind of basic stuff, though, as you're gathering the information. I'm going to go to the next one, which is the slide number 21. And Emily, I'll just keep going.
Okay,
for this
sure,
one.
sure. Yeah.
Travel presence, page 4, part 7. So I'm just going to show you page 4, part 7. Here's page 4, part 7. You see lots of spaces there. And this is really important. The government says, how many total days did you spend outside the United States in the last 5 years? But then the big one, number C, list all trips of 24 hours or more that you have taken outside the United States since becoming a lawful permanent resident. Now, I have clients who have been lawful permanent residents for 20 years, and their response to that is, you've got to be kidding me. They want to know every time I was outside the United States since I became a permanent resident, and I said, they're not kidding. I've got a question though at the back.
My question was, having worked both sides in Yakima,
Yeah.
that question wasn't on the intake, so when they got to the paralegal, all of a sudden you had to sit there and talk long and stuff. Has that been changed, that
It
process?
has. The question was that wasn't on the intake originally. Now it is. It's part of the early
That's
part of the
great.
process. So people can be spending a lot of their time getting that information down rather than taking up our time at the paralegal table. And then the hint that we have here is it's easier to start with question C. List all your time, and then by the time then you get up to A, which is tell me the times in the last 5 years where you've just listed everything, so you've got that information handy there. Children, the question, there's a question that says, tell us about your children, page 6. And I just want to, again, read to this one. It says, how many sons or daughters have you had? The question is not in this marriage. The question is not who are alive. The question is not who are less than the age of 21. The question is, how many have you had? Tell me about them. So the government does want to know all this information. The way I look at it is, because the government's basically thinking, well, they're going to want to apply for permanent residence or citizenship later on, we want a record of you having sworn that this is all the kids you've ever had, so that if someone comes later on and says, hey, I'm Greg's kid, they can look at this form and say, well, he didn't tell us about you, and then they can deal with that issue. So it is something that's important to know. A lot of people don't know the date of birth of their child. You could still say unknown to deal with that.
And another question that comes up a lot in writing down children's and their address and their A number, if they have one, is, oh, what if my kids are here and they don't have status, they don't have papers? What do we do? Do I put them on there or not? And the answer is yes, you're supposed to list all your children, but you do want to flag that for an attorney to sort of just explain to them what risks might be involved with that or not. So just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're helping people answer that question about kids who don't have documents here. All right, so moving on to part 10, which is on page 6, there's a whole series, several pages of yes and no questions. And I would just caution you when you're going through these sections, it's really easy to get into this rhythm of asking these long questions and the person saying no, 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 and miss an issue that could be a very big deal for that person's eligibility or even status here in the United States. So I would just encourage you to ask these questions kind of in different ways. Don't just settle with the first no you get, but just try to kind of flesh out their answer a bit, ask it different ways. So for example, number 4, there's a question about taxes. Have you ever failed to file a required federal, state, or local income tax form? Maybe ask that a couple different ways. Did you file your taxes last year? Do you always file your taxes when you're required to? Because if they haven't, if they've missed a year or two, that could become an issue for good moral character. And again, flag that for the attorney if it seems like that might be a problem. Number 7, someone had earlier asked, I guess she's gone though, about the the legal incompetents. This is generally if, in a criminal proceeding usually, but not always, if a judge has found someone to be incompetent to stand trial. So, that's kind of a way to ask about that, or if they've had to spend time in a mental hospital and weren't allowed to leave. And again, this has more to do with being able to take a meaningful oath, and it's not so much about good moral character. Let's see, on page 8 begins a whole series of questions about arrests and criminal history. There's kind of a funny question, number 15, have you ever committed a crime that you were not arrested for? Generally, we would say that people don't know when they've committed a crime necessarily. Under state and federal law, there's specific elements of crimes, and so I guess if a person thinks they did, you want them to talk to the attorney, the criminal attorney probably, but I've never seen anyone answer yes to that question. And again, these questions 16 through 21 that have to do with arrests and criminal procedure, it's very important to ask them different ways. Have you ever been stopped by the police? Have you ever been stopped by immigration? Have you ever talked to the police about anything? Have you ever been inside a courtroom? Because there's a lot of kind of legal terms here that may not mean much, especially through interpretation. And so try to ask all of these questions various ways. I think at the sites we have the ability to check people's background, because fairly often I will run into people who say, oh yeah, but that was all taken care of, when in fact, for immigration purposes, a criminal matter may not have been taken care of. So,
and on that one, Emily, so a lot of times we're dealing with clients who come from countries where their records get purged or their records are removed and fully legally. But from the United States view, how does the United States government look at that? There's still a record,
There's
right?
still a record for immigration purposes, yeah. And there's still be considered, both in the good moral character analysis, and also it could be something that makes a person deportable, and that's why you want to be so very cautious about any arrests or criminal procedures that happened in the past here or in a different country. And I think people who are coming to the Citizenship Day, if they do have criminal matters, they are being told to bring documents about those so that the criminal lawyer can analyze those and let them know if it's okay to go forward that day or if they need to get representation.
All right, we're getting close to the end here. We're on slide number 23. Selective service. A lot of people say selective service. There's no draft. There isn't a draft, but there's still selective service, and everybody has to go through the process. All the males, 18 through 25, have to go through the process of registration for that. And so we do have documents at the program for people. And a lot of times people say, what? I never knew that I had to register for selective service. And that's really important for us to physically be there to see them, because you can kind of go, oh, I can tell you didn't know. You didn't really know that you were supposed to do that. And the government, because we don't have a draft, the government is pretty good about that process right now, but a person does have to kind of swear they didn't knowingly or willfully or intentionally fail to register. So there's all sorts of processes that we can go find out whether they registered. I had one client who didn't remember whether he did. If a person is beyond a certain age, they'll be pretty much able to get through the process easier anyway. It's usually over 31. And then anybody not 26, if they're 26 but under 31, there's that issue again, because this is within that window, that moving window of good moral character. That's a potential problem. We want to deal with it and make sure it's dealt with effectively for them. Some people we might not want to file. Others we might have a very good reason to show why they didn't do it. Prepare signatures. You're not going to be doing that, so I won't even cover that, but attorneys have a special, changed yet again, process for how they sign this. Emily, slide number 24.
Okay. All right, this is kind of going back to sort of the criminal issues I was talking about before. Some of the questions on the form are designed not only to show if the person is eligible, can show good moral character, but also if to show that whether or not they're deportable. And there's various types of conduct that can make someone deportable, and this is sort of immigration's last chance to look at a person's record and see, if they want to allow the person to live here permanently as a citizen. And so they do not only look at the information on the N-400, but they do background checks by means of the fingerprints, and they do other types of background checks that we don't necessarily know that much about. But when things are revealed through the citizenship process, a person may become deportable if they haven't gotten good legal advice. And so on this slide 24, we've just listed a couple of the things that could make a person deportable, even if they might otherwise be eligible for citizenship. And those are things like an aggravated felony, which is kind of a term of art in immigration law, which is probably one of the more severe criminal categories for an immigrant, which often makes them ineligible for any type of relief from removal or deportation. If someone's made a false claim to U.S. citizenship, pretended to be a U.S. citizen before by using someone else's birth certificate or something else, that can make them deportable. If they've given false information to the U.S. government, for example, if they got their green card based on false information, that could make them deportable. Also, if they've committed certain types of crimes that are called CIMTs, crimes involving moral turpitude, they could be deportable, as well as having voted unlawfully or having gotten their green card unlawfully. So those are all things just to keep in the back of your mind if something comes up when you're interviewing someone or going over the forms with them.
Okay, slide number 25. Disability waivers, we're not the experts on this. We refer people out if they've got an issue saying, I have a disability, I cannot do this English issue, medically determinable. I'm a doctor, but it's a juris doctor, not a medical doctor. I'm not an osteopath, so I'm not going to try to make that judgment. So if people come to you with that, we've got the forms. We're going to have people talk to them about it. But basically, it has to be unable to learn English or to do that. So we'll leave it at that. That's for the experts.
All right. One other thing we want you to be aware about is that someone may already be a citizen and not already know it. And so, you know, in our screening and intake, we'll have the ability to screen for that. If someone's already a citizen, obviously they don't need to naturalize. And the most recent citizenship law is called the Child Citizenship Act. And generally, a child automatically becomes a citizen if they are under 18, one of their parents naturalizes or is already a U.S. citizen by birth, and that child is living in the physical and legal custody of that citizen parent, and the child is a lawful permanent resident themselves. So if a child meets all those conditions, they automatically become a citizen without even submitting a form, and so they don't need to do this N-400 process. They could be 35 and not know that they're a citizen if one of their parents naturalized when they were under 18 and met these other conditions. And their process is either applying for a U.S. passport or submitting a form which is called an N-600 and requesting a certificate of citizenship. So you may happily run into someone like that who's already a citizen and didn't realize it at the time.
Emily, has it happened to you?
Yes.
It's happened to me. Last year, I don't have my glasses on. Anybody here from Tukwila last year? We had someone, I think Bonnie was there, and Bonnie was like, this person's a citizen, they don't have to apply. So it's really kind of fun. It's one of those great experiences for people to deal with. Hey, guess what? Thank you. We are at the end. We're at the beginning, as it were. Again, thanks very much. It's been pouring rain outside, by the way. It's just horrible there, though. But it's getting better now. Want you to know that there are a lot of resources available. A lot of people, aside from you, again, thank you very much. There are a lot of people who are working very, very hard. Jennifer, thanks for all the work that you've done as well to get this program up and running. And every session, we always get new stuff and more interesting, creative. We've got AILA contacts, Chris Helm, Shannon Underwood, Aaron Hall. We have One America contacts. There's Jennifer's number right there, an email address. Please be there at 8 o'clock. Be there for a long day. I've got an official dinner to go to that night, and I have a feeling I'm just going to be kind of leaning on the table there at the end. But I think you're really going to find it to be rewarding. I'm looking at some of the faces of people who have done it before. It's really a great experience. I practically have tears in my eyes as a result of it because you really do change people's lives. So if there are any questions, we're happy to answer questions. Otherwise, see you on Saturday. Thanks very much, everybody.